So as you can see, the back of the van is pretty much completely empty, which means that our van life journey touring the USA has officially come to an end. So we're back in the DFW area, at least for the next 2 weeks, after which we will be leaving the USA. And I just want to talk about some of the culture shocks that I experienced from traveling around the US while they're still top of mind, because we just got back from this trip literally 2 or 3 days ago, and there are some things that blew my mind even as an American. So I know you as a European, most of my audience is European, so I'm just going to assume that you're from Europe. These things will probably blow your mind as well, because they blew my girlfriend's mind even more than they blew my mind. The first of which being the amount of billboards that you see traveling through the US. This is something that you see constantly, and it's not just how many billboards you see, it's the subject matter on these billboards. So for starters, I remember, I think it was the second day of our trip, we were in Louisiana and we were on our way to New Orleans, but we were still in this very, very rural area, very conservative area. And I saw this billboard on the side of the road that said something pertaining to religion and school, I believe. I think it says something about ending socialism and making Christianity more prominent in schools. I could be wrong about that. Everything's kind of a blur, but I definitely remember it said end socialism. I vividly remember seeing those words on that billboard, and it kind of blew my mind, because why would you need a billboard like that in Louisiana, of all places? A place that is historically and currently overwhelmingly conservative. There is no socialism taking place anywhere near Louisiana. So what's the point of spending thousands of dollars of your hard-earned money, or hard-earned money, we don't know how they made the money, but spending thousands of dollars on a billboard talking about ending socialism in the middle of one of the most conservative states in the most conservative region of the country? It makes no sense at all. No sense. I don't understand it. And furthermore, I saw this especially in the LA region. If you're from LA, or if you've been to LA, then you know about the Sweet James billboards. You're like, who is Sweet James? Sweet James is basically this attorney who specializes in, well, doing lawyer stuff. I don't even know exactly what he does. I just know that he's a lawyer, and he has a bunch of billboards all over LA. I think I even saw a few of them in Nevada as well. But he's not the only one. There are a lot of billboards promoting lawyers. That's something that we saw very, very frequently all across the US. And I guess I can kind of see where the return on investment would come from that. But at the same time, I don't think I ever saw that in Europe. I never saw lawyers advertising themselves on billboards, especially to the extent that we saw traveling throughout the US. In fact, I want to say in my time in Europe, I spent 14 months in the Netherlands. I don't know if I saw more than maybe 5 or 10 billboards in my entire time there. Now, I'm sure they did exist, but you definitely don't see nearly as many billboards. And listen, this is just my personal opinion, but I imagine that the lack of billboards in those places is a big part of the reason why people in Europe, aside from having much more diligent driver's ed courses and things of that nature, and a higher barrier of entry to driving, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a big part of the reason why there are fewer accidents in Europe. Vehicular accidents, that is because there are fewer distractions. When you have these billboards that you're meant to read, some of them you're not meant to read, but some of them, they have full-on text that you're supposed to read. That momentary distraction, especially in an environment where you're driving 100 kilometers an hour plus, can be fatal. So seeing all of those billboards definitely served as a big reverse culture shock for me, and it has served as a big reverse culture shock for me even before we went on that trip. Just being back in Dallas and seeing on the highways how many billboards there are. Or even if you go in a place like LA, they have billboards on regular roads, not even on the highway, but on regular roads. You go down some of those streets near Hollywood and you will see billboards literally on the sides of buildings. just promoting movies and things of that nature, is definitely very interesting to see. And I'm not gonna lie, I feel like having fewer billboards and just less advertising in general definitely helped me maintain a much more peaceful state of mind in Europe. Now, the next thing that really struck me as odd being back in the US and taking this cross-country road trip, driving the distance from Lisbon to Moscow twice, 2 times over, is the lack of streetlights. There are so few streetlights in the US, and I will say this is one area where I think Dallas is categorically ahead of most of the US, because it seems like in a lot of the US, especially when you get out into the more rural areas, there are just no streetlights. Now, to be fair, I've never really driven in Europe at night, but I will say that when we spent a month in Vassen, the Netherlands, that's a city of 12,000 people, they had streetlights there. I vividly remember they had streetlights there. They weren't as frequent, so there were gaps of darkness, but in the US, a lot of the time, especially on these highways, there are no streetlights at all. I'm talking about literally for hundreds of kilometers, they will have no streetlights, and you have to rely solely on your car's headlights. And this is an old van, it's 20 years old. The headlights are fogged up, they don't really work as well. So that was scary. A lot of times I actually had to use my phone GPS just to see which direction the road was going in, because I wasn't confident enough in my reaction time to take that risk, especially with my girlfriend in the car. It was so dark that I was just on edge most of the time, because you never really knew when you would see something cross the road, or if there'd be a person there, or maybe a car that had broken down or whatever and they didn't have the hazards on. You just never knew what you might encounter. Now, speaking of animals, something else that has really shocked me, and definitely shocked my girlfriend much more than it did me, was the amount of roadkill that you see on the side of roads here in the US. So in the Netherlands, I never saw roadkill. There was never a time where I saw a dead squirrel. I think actually that's a lie. I did see one dead rabbit, I think it was. One dead rabbit, or maybe it was a dead squirrel. It was a small animal, but I saw a dead animal. Maybe it was a hedgehog actually, I don't know. But I saw one dead animal in the road in my entire time in the Netherlands, in 14 months. There was a stretch of road during our trip, I think it was coming from Pennsylvania to Ohio. There was a stretch of road where literally, I am not exaggerating, I saw at least one dead animal every few miles, every few kilometers rather, at least one. So you have to think about it. I drove probably a few hundred miles. So I saw at least 50 to 100 dead animals. No exaggeration. There were deer, there were rabbits, raccoons, skunks, squirrels, all types of roadkill on the side of the road. And I don't know if maybe there are just more animals here and we just do a much worse job of separating the road from those forested areas, or if it's just that in the Netherlands they do a better job of cleaning the roadkill. I don't know what it is. What I do know is that it was very unsettling to see. As someone who loves animals, that's literally one of my biggest fears, is killing an animal with a car. One of my biggest fears, and thankfully it didn't happen, but there were a few times where a deer would run across the road right in front of the car, and thankfully, because I was already driving slow, because again, no street lights, I was able to react in time to not hit them. But there was literally a point in time, my girlfriend, she loves animals as well. There was a point in time where she literally got emotional because of how many dead animals there were on the side of the road. And I'm not gonna lie, it definitely made me feel very off just seeing that many dead animals. So again, maybe there are measures that some of these places can take to separate those areas a little bit better, because it's dangerous. It's not just dangerous for the animals, it's dangerous for the drivers as well. Because if you're like me, if you see something run in front of your car, you're probably gonna swerve out of the way to try to avoid it. And that can lead to a fatal accident for you. And then you still might hit the animal anyways. So that's something that I think the US needs to address. It's great that there are so many animals, it's just that the US needs to do a better job. And I don't know if this is at the federal or local level, probably the local level. Some of these places need to do a better job of separating, creating barriers between these forested areas and the streets. Or at the very least, add more street lights so that you can see the animals coming in advance. So again, more street lights. It really comes back to having more street lights. That will solve a lot of issues. But seeing that roadkill on the side of the road, I'm not gonna lie, it never got any easier. And some of them, you can see that they got hit. Some of them, it looked like maybe they just died of natural causes, but some of them, you could tell they got hit and dragged, and there would be marks in the street, and it was just all bad. If you're someone who loves animals like I do, or like my girlfriend does, then keep that in mind before taking a trip here in the US, especially in those more rural areas, because that's something that you unfortunately are going to encounter. Now, something else that I encountered quite a bit of in the US, and this one really shocked me, even coming from Dallas, was license plates, or the lack thereof. Now, for starters, with license plates, of course, there are 48 contiguous states here in the US. So you have Alaska and Hawaii, which are kind of out of the way. You have to pretty much fly to those places, unless you're willing to drive through Canada, or if you have a boat or something. But for the lower 48 states, each of those states has its own license plate. What I didn't know is that some of these states have multiple variations of state license plates. So in Maryland specifically, I remember there were at least 4 or 5 different options that it seemed like people could choose from for their license plates. Now here in Texas, everyone pretty much has the basic white license plate with the black text. In the Netherlands, everyone has that same yellow license plate. It doesn't matter which province you're from, it doesn't matter. In Germany, I think it's the same as well. And I think that's kind of the case in most, if not all, European countries, that they all have the same license plates, and the license plates have no designs on them or anything like that, because they want the license plates to be easy to read. Here, some of the license plates have so many designs on them, and they have so many different colors that you literally can't even read the text. So I don't know how that works with, let's say for example, if you run a red light, they take a picture of your plate and they send you the ticket. I don't know how they can read that. I really don't. Maybe that technology is a lot more advanced than I'm aware of, but to me, that seems like an absolute nightmare trying to decipher what some of those license plates say, because a lot of them are literally just illegible. But something that's even more interesting is that, and I saw this across the whole country, a lot of cars, and when I say a lot, it's not that most cars do this, but more than you would think, don't have license plates at all. They literally had no license plates in the back or in the front. Some states actually don't require a license plate in the front. Texas is not one of those states, Louisiana is, but I'm talking about no license plates in the back of the car, and these cars are driving confidently. They are driving confidently as if they don't have a care in the world what happens to them. Now obviously, if the police see you driving without a license plate, they're going to pull you over. So I don't know why so many cars felt okay with doing this. I know that this is an issue in some areas, that people will actually steal license plates off of cars so that they can use the license plates to commit crimes. So they'll basically put the plates on another car, use that car to commit a crime, and then dump the car and or the license plates. So maybe some of those people were victims of that, but personally, if that happened to me, I would just be catching Ubers, because there is no way that you're gonna see me driving around without license plates. I just don't see how people feel comfortable doing that. I never saw that in Europe. I never saw that, not even once. Not a single time did I ever see a vehicle without plates. And it's interesting because I saw far fewer patrol officers in Europe than I did here in the US. In fact, in the Netherlands, I don't think I ever saw anyone pulled over on the side of the road. Never saw it. But here, you see it pretty much every day. Every single day, especially when you're on the road like we were, you're gonna see somebody on the side of the road getting a ticket or a reprimanding from an officer. Especially in those more rural areas where, in some of these places, the cities actually rely heavily on that ticket revenue to sustain themselves. So that's kind of interesting because, again, you would think that maybe those people justify it from the standpoint of not having a lot of patrol officers, but there are a lot of patrol officers and they are looking for that, and they will pull your ass over for not having a plate. So I don't know what that's all about. I don't know why people are so comfortable doing that, or maybe they're not. Maybe they just like the adrenaline rush or something. I don't know, but it's definitely something that if you're from Europe, I'd imagine that that would probably surprise you, as well as the different variety of license plates that you see, not just across the country as a whole, but in each individual state. Now, the next thing that really surprised me, and this definitely shocked my girlfriend, is the amount of abandoned cars that you see here in the US. So I'm laughing because early on in the trip, I don't know exactly where we were. We had to be somewhere in Mississippi or Louisiana. It was early in the trip, and we were in the middle of nowhere. And every so often, we would see a car parked on the shoulder with nobody in it. No hazards, no nothing. Just a car parked. And some of these cars still look functional. They don't have a blown out tire. They don't have any visible damage. They're just there. And Nadia was like, hey, what are those cars doing there? And I was like, oh, those are abandoned cars. And I said it matter-of-factly because it's something that I'm kind of accustomed to. But she was like, what do you mean they're abandoned? And I was like, yeah, they're abandoned. People left their cars there. And she's like, they left their cars there? She was so surprised. And a lot of times in the US, you know that a car is abandoned because they'll place this little orange or yellow paper or tag on one of the windows. So if you're ever driving through the US and you see a car on the side of the road with a yellow or orange piece of paper anywhere on any of the windows, you know that car is abandoned. But her surprise at that got me thinking, I never saw that in Europe. I never saw an abandoned car on the side of the road anywhere in Europe, especially not in the Netherlands. I never ever saw that. Now mind you, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the highway, but you don't have to spend much time on the highway at all here in the US to see that. I could go drive on the highway right now for 10 minutes and I'll see at least one abandoned car on the side of the road, because there are just a lot of them. And I don't know if it's because maybe in Europe the cars are just more reliable, the brands, but at the same time, and I don't mean this as a knock on European cars, but German cars specifically are not known for being very reliable. They are known for leaving you stranded on the side of the road. So I don't know if maybe they just have higher standards for inspections, so the cars are more reliable simply because you have to maintain them at a higher level than you do here in the US, because here you also see a lot of very dilapidated vehicles. A lot of cars that you see driving where you're like, that car should not be on the road. That car needs to be at the junkyard. So that could be the reason why, but that's something that you do see a lot of here, is that you'll literally see cars that are unclaimed. And a lot of times it's because the cars have broken down and they pretty much had to abandon them, because if there's nothing within 50 miles or 100 miles, which is probably what, 150 kilometers in either direction of you, which is also something that you don't really see in Europe, and I'll speak on that here in a second. I mean, what other choice do you have? You have to get out of the car, and if you don't have any cell reception, you're gonna have to rely on the generosity of a stranger to take you to the nearest place where you can maybe get some cell service and catch an Uber or call for somebody or whatever else. But how are you going to get that car out of there? Maybe you can call a tow truck, but a lot of times for some of these cars, it's not even worth the hassle and the money of calling a tow truck to those areas, and you don't even know where you are. So some of these cars are just abandoned. And when I lived in my car in LA back in 2023, I do remember in some parking garages, you would see abandoned cars as well. You would see cars that would be parked in the same spot for literally weeks on end, and these aren't parking lots where you're supposed to do this. These aren't airport parking lots where you're paying per day. I'm talking about the Target parking garage or places like that, where you'd have a car that's literally just there. You don't see anybody in it ever, and you just know, hey, this car is abandoned. And if anything, those cars were probably used to commit crimes. So those were probably some of the cars that had the stolen license plates that people used to commit crimes and then just dumped them in the parking garage and went on about their lives. But definitely not something you see a whole lot of in Europe. And I imagine that even if you did, even if the cars weren't held to that same standard, it seems like in Europe they're just more diligent about getting stuff like that out of the way, because it does present a safety hazard in some cases. It can definitely present a safety hazard especially when you don't have street lights. So imagine you just have these abandoned cars on the side of the road and you have no street lights, so you don't know when they're coming. You don't know if there's a car that's maybe even broken down on a stretch of the road where there is no shoulder to pull over on, and the car is just still on the highway, and you don't know until it's too late. People have died because of scenarios like that. So that's definitely something that I found pretty surprising, just the volume, the sheer volume, and thinking back to never having seen that in Europe. Now, the next thing that really surprised me and my girlfriend about road tripping here in the US is how big the country is. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier already, but we drove the distance of Lisbon to Moscow. So from Portugal to Russia, twice. We drove that distance 2 times over in a matter of about 3.5, almost 4 weeks. Crazy. When you think about it like that, you're like, wow, that is a lot of driving. I know that is a lot of driving, and I'm not saying that people in Europe don't take road trips like that, but I've never personally heard of that. I've never heard of somebody just driving from Portugal to Russia for fun.